Several jaw-dropping love triangles went down on Gossip Girl, and we've ranked them from least cringy to super scandalous. Here's your ranking of the 15 most insane love triangles to happen between the iconic characters of Gossip Girl. Dan, Vanessa, and Serena. The love triangle between Dan, Vanessa, and Serena was complicated because Dan had history with Vanessa. She was the first girl he ever had real feelings for. But he developed newer feelings for Serena when he got a little older. When both girls were in front of him at the same time, it was beyond complicated. In the end, we know that Dan ends up with Serena. Nate, Blair, and Serena. The love triangle between Nate, Blair, and Serena started the night of the Shepherd wedding when Serena helped Nate cheat on Blair. That was one of the worst things Serena could have done because Nate and Blair were promising to save their virginities for each other. Nate ended up swiping his V card with Serena behind Blair's back. In the end, we know that Nate doesn't end up with Blair or Serena. Blair, Chuck, and Nate. Blair and Nate were childhood sweethearts. Chuck and Nate were childhood best friends. You'd think it would be cut and dry without any overlap, but instead, Blair and Chuck developed feelings for each other. Blair lost her virginity to Chuck in the back of his limo, and it definitely put a dagger in Chuck and Nate's brotherly friendship for a while there. In the end, we know that Blair ends up with Chuck. Nate, Vanessa, and Jenny. Nate had genuine feelings for Vanessa and Jenny at different times. Sometimes his feelings for both of them overlapped. One of the big issues here is that Vanessa and Jenny were childhood friends who grew up feeling like they were real-life sisters. In the end, we know that Nate doesn't end up with Vanessa or Jenny. Jenny, Asher, and Eric. The love triangle between Jenny, Asher, and Eric was complicated. That's because Asher and Eric were secretly hooking up, and Asher was using Jenny as a cover-up to convince the world that he was straight. In the end, Asher didn't end up with Jenny or Eric. Blair, Chuck, and Dan. One of the more intense love triangle dynamics to pop up towards the end of the show happened between Blair, Chuck, and Dan. Dan developed real feelings for Blair, and that was exposed in the book he wrote. Even though Blair hated Dan at first, she developed real feelings for him in return. Ultimately, Blair ends up with Chuck. Serena, Dan, and Nate. When Serena was back and forth in her head about who she should date between Dan and Nate, she left them both waiting for a while because she couldn't figure out who the better option was. By the time she was ready to tell them her decision, interestingly enough, they had both moved on with new women. But in the end, Serena ends up with Dan. Dan, Serena, and Georgina. When Georgina first entered the picture, she pretended to be someone else to attract Dan. It led to some serious complications. Later, after Dan knew who she was, he attempted to date Georgina again. It was super weird, and at times it left Serena feeling beyond jaded and jealous. In the end, Dan ends up with Serena. Lily, Bart, and Rufus. The drama between Lily, Bart, and Rufus was intense to watch. The first time viewers thought Bart died, he was on his way to fight for his marriage with Lily, and she was going to ask him for a divorce so she could pursue her love story with Rufus. In the end, Lily doesn't end up with Bart or Rufus. Gabriel, Serena, and Poppy. Serena developed feelings for a con artist named Gabriel while he was still secretly dating her friend Poppy. This love triangle was a hot mess, and it led to some of Serena's friends and family members getting swindled out of their money. In the end, Gabriel definitely didn't end up with Serena, and it's unclear if he ever reconciled with Poppy. Dan, Vanessa, and Olivia. The threesome scene between Dan, Vanessa, and Olivia was as dramatic as it gets. Dan was dating Olivia while considering Vanessa to be one of his best friends. They all shared an intimate night together, and it totally destroyed his relationship with Olivia. In the end, we're well aware that Dan doesn't end up with Vanessa or Olivia. Lily, William, and Rufus. William was doing everything in his power to win Lily back while she was married to Rufus. He even pretended she still had cancer after she was already healed to spend more time with her. As he tried to steal her away from Rufus, he pulled out all the stops. Somehow, it actually worked. In the end, Lily ends up with William. Trip, Maureen, and Serena. The love triangle between Trip, Maureen, and Serena was beyond toxic because Serena was a mistress while Trip was still married to Maureen. Serena knew it was shady to get involved with a married man, but she gave in to temptation anyway. In the end, Trip ended up alone because Maureen filed for divorce and Serena dumped him too. Blair, Chuck, and Lewis. Things got extremely intense in the love triangle between Blair, Chuck, and Lewis. That's because Lewis found out that Blair was still deeply in love with Chuck on the day she was about to marry Lewis. Lewis tried to blackmail her into staying in a loveless marriage by threatening to bankrupt her family's fortune. Chuck privately paid off the dowry so Blair would be free. In the end, we're already aware that Blair ends up with Chuck. Rufus, Lily, and Ivy. Arguably the most cringeworthy love triangle of all on Gossip Girl happened between Rufus, Lily, and Ivy. Ivy was going balls to the wall trying to get revenge on Lily, and part of her plot was to seduce Rufus. It worked, and Rufus totally fell for it. But in the end, Rufus doesn't end up with Lily or Ivy. What do you think of all these insane love triangles on Gossip Girl? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below.